He walks through the favoured cities of medieval Europe, half man, half myth, healing the dying, blessing the dead. A saint, they said, though in the fields and forests, the old women knew better. They left bread for his dog and icons in the wells. Often in folklore, we draw comparisons between pagan rituals and how they evolved into Christian ones. There is no better example of that than the cult that sprung up around San Rocco. Belief in his ability to heal the sick and fight off plague led to some interesting customs around him. We will see how the story of a pilgrim, charitable saint evolved into a folk hero whose followers ended up doing some pretty witchy things, if you ask me. Roch was born in Montpellier, France, sometime in the early 1300s, a century haunted by famine, war, and plague. From the start, he was marked for something otherworldly. On his chest was a deep red birthmark in the shape of a cross, said to be the sign that the Blessed Virgin Mary had heard his mother's desperate prayers to be freed from barrenness. From childhood, Roch was pious to the point of austerity. He fasted twice each week, imitating his devout mother, and turned his life towards contemplation rather than comfort. When his parents died, he was just 20. He gave away his inheritance to the poor, handed governance of Montpellier to his uncle, and took up the life of a pilgrim, joining the Third Order Franciscans and dressing in their simple garb. He set out for Rome, as many of the faithful did, to visit the holy places. But Europe, at this time, was in the grip of the Black Death, and the world he walked through was one of contagion and fear. In every town he passed, Aquapendente, Rimini, Novara, and countless others, he found the dying and the desperate. Rather than flee, he stayed among them, moving from bed to bed, healing the sick with nothing but prayer and the sign of the cross. Legend says he spent an entire year tending the poor, always in hospitals, always where the plague was fiercest. One night, as he slept in the hospital at Pacienza, an angel appeared in a dream and told him, "Roch, most devout to Christ, know that thou art smitten with the pestilence. Study now how thou mayest be cured. When he awoke, the disease had already taken hold, fever burning beneath his arms, sores rising on his skin. He thanked God for his suffering and left the hospital so as not to endanger others. In the wilderness outside Pacienza, he built a rough shelter of branches and leaves. There, feverish and alone, he prayed for death, but instead, a miracle came. A spring of clear water burst from the earth beside him, and each day a hunting dog appeared from the woods, bringing bread stolen from its master's table. The animal licked his wounds and stayed beside him as a silent guardian. The dog's master was a nobleman named Gotthard, who soon noticed the bread missing from his table. Curious, he followed the hound into the forest and found the sick pilgrim resting by his hut. Roch begged him to keep his distance for fear of contagion, but Gotthard saw holiness where others saw plague. He built Roch a small shelter and tended to him until his full strength returned. When Roch was well enough to travel, he followed divine prompting to return home to Montpellier. But when he arrived, he found the city at war. Refusing to reveal his noble birth, he was mistaken for a spy and imprisoned by his own uncle, who no longer recognized him beneath the scars and rags of pilgrimage. Roch offered no defense, entrusting himself entirely to God's will. He languished in prison for 5 years. Some say angels visited him there, others that he died alone, forgotten by the world. As told by the Franciscan scholar Marian A. Hebig, when he felt that his end was drawing near, St. Roch was asked that a priest might come and administer the last sacraments. The priest, on entering the prison, beheld it supernaturally lighted up, and the poor captive surrounded with a special radiance. As death claimed its victim, a tablet appeared on the wall on which an angelic hand had written in golden letters the name of Roch and the prediction that all who would invoke his intercession would be delivered from the plague. His death, much like his life, sits between miracle and mystery. After his passing, stories spread of miraculous healings wherever his relics were taken. The faithful whispered that even his dog, the nameless companion who fed him in the wilderness, had become holy. And so St. Roch, the beggar, the plague bearer, and the man who survived the pestilence, was reborn in legend as the protector against it. Whatever the true details of his death, St. Roch's reputation as a miraculous healer spread rapidly after his passing. By the early 1400s, Europe's plague-stricken towns had made him their special intercessor, the saint who had suffered the disease and lived to heal others. During the Council of Constance in 1414, when the plague broke out among the delegates, the council fathers invoked his aid and held public processions in his honour. The pestilence ceased soon after. From that point on, St. Roch became the saint of contagion, a symbol of endurance, mercy, and divine protection against invisible horrors. Artists of the Italian Renaissance gave his image a distinctive and haunting form. Clad in the brown pilgrim's garb and broad-brimmed hat of the Franciscans, staff in hand, Roch was shown lifting the hem of his robe to reveal a raw, swollen plague sore on his thigh. The bubo, painted where viewers could clearly see it, forged an intimate bond of sympathy between the saint and the afflicted. It was a reminder that he too had borne the sickness, that his holiness came through suffering and the same flesh that betrayed them. These paintings multiplied in the plague years of the 15th century, filling Italian chapels with a strange blend of devotion and dread. Roch's relics were first laid to rest in Montpellier, but the story of his body has a life of its own. In 1485, a group of Venetians determined to secure his protection for their own city travelled to France under the pretense of a pilgrimage and stole his remains. They smuggled them back across the sea, where they were received in Venice with inexpressible joy. Venice, the mercantile crossroads of the Mediterranean, had suffered plague after plague, and a patron saint of pestilence was both a safeguard and a civic talisman. This was not their first theft. The Venetians had already smuggled the body of St. Mark out of Alexandria centuries earlier, hiding it under layers of pork and cabbage to deter inspection by Muslim guards. Today, the body of St. Roch still lies in Venice, in the church built to house the stolen relics. When another wave of plague struck Venice in 1478, devotion to the saint deepened to an organised brotherhood. A lay confraternity of citizens was founded to follow his example of charity and serve the poor and infected. They built hospitals and plague houses, carried bread and water to the dying, and later commissioned a monumental cycle of paintings from Jacopo Tintoretto. In St. Roch, ministering to plague victims, the saint appears not in medieval France but in contemporary Venice, aboard a lazaretto, one of the quarantine ships anchored in the lagoon. Tintoretto's figures writhe and clutch at their sores, while Roch moves among them, serene, luminous, and untouchable. The holy contagion that heals rather than kills. His feast day, August 16th, became a fixed point in the calendar for plague remembrance. Cities across Europe held processions in his name. Pilgrims carried bread, banners embroidered with dogs, and charms shaped like open wounds or wax limbs. The faithful left offerings at his shrines, loaves of bread, ribbons, wax votives, small carved dogs, and prayed for protection from sickness. In some regions, the dog itself took on symbolic power, a totemic figure linking the human and divine, echoing ancient canines like Anubis or the Celtic hounds of the otherworld who guided souls between life and death. To the church, St. Roch's popularity was both a blessing and a challenge. His cult was officially recognised and encouraged, yet it often bordered on folk magic. The belief that touching his relics or gazing on his wounded image could confer immunity, that his faithful dog might guard the threshold between plague and home. In those processions, Christian piety mingled easily with pagan instinct, sacrifice and contagion, miracle and medicine. As the cult following around San Rocco spread across Europe, his veneration took on a deeply local, deeply physical life. A tapestry of rituals, charms, and customs that blended Christian devotion with older, pre-Christian patterns of folk belief. People prayed to Roch while keeping a small piece of bread, the dog's bread, in their homes as a charm against sickness. It was believed to carry the saint's compassion and the dog's loyalty into the household. In other regions, statues of Roch and his faithful hound were lowered into wells or buried in fields to draw out the plague. The imagery is unmistakably ancient, an echo of pagan well offerings, where sacred objects were placed in water or soil to appease spirits and transform misfortune into blessing. Here, Christian saint and pre-Christian ritual entwined seamlessly, united by the shared human desire to bargain with the unseen. Even today, in some Italian communities, customs take on a darker and more penitential edge. In Palmi, the city glows with lights during the novena and the streets fill with fairs and their traditional parade of towering papier-mâché figures. Children create dioramas depicting scenes from the saint's life, his solitude in the woods, his care for the dying, as well as his years in the prison cell. Wax figures in the shape of limbs, organs, or plague sores are carried into the church and laid before his altar in thanks for healings already received or pleadings for healings yet to come. On his feast day itself, the statue is carried through the streets accompanied by the spinati, bare-chested, barefoot men wearing garments of thorned branches bound with willow. These bristling cones of thorns rake and pierce the skin as the men walk, clutching an image of the saint to their chests. Women wear crowns woven from the same prickly branches. It is a procession of devotion and pain, a living echo of Roch's own suffering, a ritual that blurs the line between medieval Christianity and something far more archaic and visceral. In Sicily, offerings pile up at the foot of his statues: gold chains, medals, watches, bracelets, gifts given in exchange for healings, rescues, and answered prayers. And the devotion is not limited to Europe. Italian-American parishes from New York's Mulberry Street to immigrant communities across the Anglosphere carry his statue through their neighbourhoods with fireworks, food stalls, and the persistent sense that St. Roch's protection still hovers over the homes of the faithful. Through these rituals, the thorn garments, the wells, the novenas, offerings of bread and blessings of animals, St. Roch becomes a liminal figure, part healer, part martyr, part relic of a much older worldview in which disease had its own gods and guardians. A saint shaped partly by scripture, partly by plague, and partly by the deep ancient instinct to reach for something that can hold back death. St. Roch balances between faith and fever, a figure caught between saint and folk hero, Christian devotion, and something much older. His life and legend show us how the sacred and the superstitious often grow from the same soil. Even now, his image survives, a pilgrim with a red cross on his chest, his leg bared to show the sore, and at his side, a loyal dog offering bread. Together, they remind us that healing isn't always pure or linear. It's born from endurance, from compassion, from the strange hope that grows in the shadow of death. Thank you so much for joining me for another Pinecones, bite-sized folklore from Rowan and Pine. I hope you will excuse my sickly voice, but I didn't want to leave you another week without an upload. If you missed it on TikTok, we have decided on a name for our listeners. The algorithm chose the Hagstone Coven, which I think reflects us pretty well. We will have a short episode on hagstones coming up imminently. If you want to check out some early and ad-free content, our Patreon is active and we have special uploads for free members as well as paid. Be sure to check out the link in our link tree if you haven't already, or just say hi on social media. That's always fun. Until next time, watch what your dog's doing with that bread.
Thanks for listening, and fuck yeah, folklore. Fuck yeah, folklore.